It's been a truly busy day today. Later in the show, you're going to hear an interview with a cabinet minister and the writer of a book called The Anxious Generation about the terrible damage being done by smartphones to British children and what can be done about it. But also, it has been a pretty dramatic day in British politics. Listen to this.
If 1 week a Tory MP who's also a doctor says the Prime Minister can't be trusted with the NHS and joins Labour, and the next week the Tory MP for Dover, on the front line of the small boats crisis, says the Prime Minister cannot be trusted with our borders and joins Labour, what is the point of this failed government staggering on?
Well, that really threw the cat into the startled pigeons. Mostly, not very much happens during Prime Minister's questions, but when Keir Starmer gestured over his shoulder to the latest Labour MP, Natalie Elphicke, elected in 2019, but for the Conservatives, it was quite the statement. On the one hand, after those local elections, it added to the sense of a Conservative Party crumbling fast, and so bolstered Starmer's demands for a quick general election. Since the last election, the government majority has now fallen by half, from 87 to 43. In a statement today, Elphicke, the Dover MP, said that Rishi Sunak's Conservatives have become a byword for incompetence and division and had abandoned the centre ground, while Starmer's Labour Party looked to the future. Britain, she said, needs a government that will build a future of hope, optimism, opportunity and fairness. Now, since Elphicke has been an ardent Brexiteer and keen on stopping the boats, her defection will be used to woo voters with similar views who are still suspicious of Labour, and at a time when senior Labour organisers are increasingly pleased about the party's progress in the south of England. Country first, party second, said Starmer. Slam. And also dunk. And yet. However, on the other hand, nevertheless, Natalie Elphicke has been on the right even of the Conservative Party, a derisive critic of Starmer's record on immigration. In the past, she's hammered him for his opposition to the Rwanda scheme and for having, in her words, no plan of his own to tackle illegal immigration. On the economy, she tweeted this: Labour's solution to tackle the cost of living? Grabbing more in taxes from the pockets of millions of hard-working British people. Same old Labour. After those and many similar remarks, the Labour left is absolutely outraged and asking the question, is there anybody Keir Starmer would not welcome from the other side? One highly respected Labour patriarch put it like this: it's all very well being a broad church, but even the broadest of churches need walls. I want to hear from you, particularly if you're a Labour voter. What do you make of the party taking Natalie Elphicke in? Text on 84850 or email me on marr@lbc.co.uk. We will hear from a shadow cabinet minister in just a moment. But I'm joined first tonight by a voice from the left of the party, the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. What was his reaction?
Surprised and shocked, like many people. I'm a great believer in the powers of conversion, but I think even this one would have strained the generosity of spirit of John the Baptist, quite honestly.
I guess the argument for it is that there is this narrative that the Conservative Party is crumbling all over, and it drives everybody further towards an early election, and therefore it's very good for Labour.
It certainly is a stunt that damages the Tories, there's no doubt about that, but it also has implications for the Labour Party as well because of the views that Natalie Elphicke has expressed in the past, and some of which I don't think the party should be associated with.
Just give me some examples of what we're talking about. Immigration, stop the votes.
The attacks on migrants, the support for the Rwanda scheme, which Labour has opposed. Other things like, can you remember when Rashford missed that penalty in the Euro matches, and then she basically condemned him for playing politics, his campaign for free school meals? I thought that, to be honest, has nothing to do with Labour values.
So do you feel at this point that there's almost nobody inside the Conservative Party that Labour wouldn't accept?
Looks like it that way. The other thing for me, though, it does mean it puts the onus on Keir Starmer now to sort out the position with regard to Diane Abbott. He needs to restore the whip to Diane as rapidly as possible now.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because not just Diane Abbott, but also Jeremy Corbyn, they're no longer welcome in the Labour Party, it seems, and Natalie Elphicke is. Is this beginning to become a Labour Party you don't feel is yours anymore?
Oh, no, it's the Labour Party's membership party, and it always will be, no matter who is the leader. But the two examples of Diane and Jeremy, there is no argument now that they shouldn't have the whip withdrawn. That should be done instantly, I believe, because You look at Jeremy and Diane's record, they've been standing up for socialist principles. They've devoted their life to the Labour Party. And that means, I think, they deserve to have the whip withdrawn. And in the context of welcoming Natalie Elphicke, what does that say about judgement that's taking place at the moment?
And what message do you think it sends to all of those millions of people who voted Labour last week?
I think it will basically, people react to it by saying, all right, this is a useful political stunt maybe in the short term, but in the longer term, it does say something about Labour values at the moment. That's why I think restoring the whip to Diane and to Jeremy, if it's possible, I think it would rebalance things.
Just staying with Labour values, one of the things that happened last week is that a lot of Muslim voters chose not to vote Labour, but to vote Green or Liberal Democrat or Independent instead. And Keir Starmer has now been given a list of demands or requests by Muslim Vice, and they include things like an arms embargo, and they include disciplining Labour MPs who did not vote for an immediate ceasefire. How do you think he should respond to that?
It's not just the Muslim Voice. The Labour Muslim Network has been saying for quite a while now that we need to really address these issues, because it's called that initial interview by Keir Starmer where he endorsed effectively the use of starvation and denial of water and etc. to Gaza. It took 9 days to correct that. It was a misspoken...
he was trapped, let's be honest.
He misspoke, and usually we've all screwed up in that way in the media, and what you usually do is you go out there straight away and say, I misspoke. It took 9 days, and that consolidated people's anger about that. Then that gets repeated on social media. We're in the right position now in terms of we're calling for an immediate ceasefire. Not to vote for that immediate ceasefire, I think it was a mistake as well. That didn't go down very well. So I think sometimes you have to hold your hands up and say, we made a mistake there. We're in the right position now, calling for an immediate ceasefire, but we need to go further. The arms embargo is the next step, I think, in demonstrating that we're serious about how we want to bring about an end to this war that's going on.
Circling back to the Elphicke announcement today, clearly one of the things it might do is persuade people of strong pro-Brexit views, perhaps strong views on immigration, that actually Labour is possible to vote for. But at the same time, I assume that your fear is that a lot of people on the left or to the left of those arguments are going to be turned off by this.
You've got to recognise that when you allow into the party people who've embraced those sort of values, vociferously in many instances, particularly with regard to the Rwanda scheme, you will alienate some of your support, because people say, well, where do we stand on these issues? That's why I think, my own view, if Natalie Elphicke had approached me as the leader of the Labour Party, I would have said, no, thank you. But one way of demonstrating, actually, we still hold to the values of the Labour Party, restore the whip to Diane and Jeremy.
And on the other side, I'm interested in where you think the perimeter, as it were, should be, what policed perimeter there should be. Apparently a Labour spokesman was asked after Prime Minister's questions today whether the Labour Party would take Nigel Farage in, and couldn't give a straightforward no.
You're joking.
I'm just telling you what I've been told.
Is that right? Well, I don't know who that Labour spokesperson was, but they need a proper briefing on what Labour history is and what our Labour values are. And we're certainly not supporting and allowing into the party, I think, the likes of Nigel Farage, who has been nothing but, as far as I'm concerned, one of the major causes of division within our society.
I think I came very close to something I never thought I'd have on air, which is John McDonnell lost for words for a moment. Mr. McDonnell, thank you very, very much for joining us. And I asked earlier on for your views about all of this. 2 interesting tweets have come in. This is Neil from Glasgow. He says, the Tories have destroyed every single public service in this country. Now their gravy train is coming to an end. They're jumping onto the nearest lifeboat, which happens to be the Labour Party. Rather than call out their abysmal record or hold any of them to account, Keir Starmer jubilantly welcomes these Tories with open arms. And Sean in Birmingham says, the Tories are finished. Be happy she joined. It just shows how out of touch this government is. If it attracts Tory voters, that's a good thing. It being the Labour Party there, of course. Now, since that interview, interestingly, Kate Osamore, another left-wing Labour MP, has just had the Labour whip restored. So perhaps the party does mean to lean out generously in both directions. I'm joined now by Anneliese Dodds, Chair of the Labour Party and Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities. Anneliese, you heard John McDonnell there saying, for goodness sake, please let in Diane Abbott, for instance, who's been a socialist all her life. She's a Labour Party person. She's outside the party. If you can have Natalie Elphicke, you can have her.
Good evening. Well, of course, John was very clear that conversion can happen as well, and I think he's quite right on that. But when it comes to cases that have been going through the Labour Party's disciplinary process, I think we've talked about this before. You know, the Labour Party's had to completely overhaul those processes. They are very robust now. We have got those clear. Well, because we want to do this properly, and that's really important. Labour Party's learned the hard way, actually, because we had the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, of course, that had to intervene in the Labour Party because of those processes not being robust. They are now, and it's absolutely critical that we make sure that they stay robust.
No doubt there were lots of conversations before this dramatic announcement today. Has Natalie Elphicke renounced her previous views on migrants and the Rwanda scheme and the economy?
Well, actually, you can see very clearly in her statement that she's very critical of the government approach on migration. She first of all states that there is appalling loss of life in the Channel. She states that the government's approach is not working. Of course, that is what Labour has been saying, that we need to have a serious plan around this. But of course, she's also very critical of the Conservative government on its failures around housing as well, and particularly the impact of temporary accommodation on children. Again, something that Labour has been pushing hard on for a long time.
I know she's done a lot of work on housing, but I just come back to the Rwanda scheme. She was very, very much in favour of the Rwanda scheme. Is she now against it?
Well, I think many people may have looked at that and thought it would work, but she's seen very clearly as a coastal MP, as indeed have many people in our country, that this is a scheme that is not going to be delivering. It's a costly con. It's one where we're going to see enormous amounts of public money being squandered on a scheme that is not going to deal with that terrible tragedy of loss of life in the Channel. It's not going to break the criminal gangs, and it's not going to deal with the backlog either.
As it happens, I agree with all of that, but I come back to my best. As chair of the Labour Party, you are clear that Natalie Elphicke has renounced her support for the Rwanda scheme.
Well, I believe she must have done, because obviously she's crossed the floor to the Labour Party. We've been very clear that that Rwanda scheme is a costly con. It's one which is unworkable. It's extortionately expensive, and it's not a serious plan to deal with a serious situation.
There's reports tonight that 7 of your female colleagues on the Labour benches have expressed their distress and protest about this, really because of Natalie Elphicke's support for her husband, Charlie Elphicke, who back in 2020 was sent to jail for 2 years for 3 serious sexual assaults. And after that, she said this of him. She said he is being punished for being charming, wealthy, charismatic and successful, attractive and attracted to women, all things that in today's climate made an easy target for dirty politics and false allegations. Can you see why many of your colleagues, particularly female colleagues, are really upset about this?
This is a very serious situation, clearly, and Natalie Elphicke has responded to these issues publicly. Also in Parliament, this has been dealt with through parliamentary processes, of course, and quite rightly so. And, it really is important that we deal with these matters seriously. There should not be any kind of a situation where anyone is subject to sexual harassment of any type. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from an MP, as with her former husband, or anybody else. It's absolutely something that must be rooted out and dealt with. And as I say, that's why those parliamentary processes have been gone through. And those have also covered, of course, Natalie Elphicke as well. Natalie
Elphicke isn't going to stand at the next election, I understand, but you are convinced that she is a good person to be a Labour MP for the next 6 months or so, that she shares your values, she shares your overall approach to the world.
Well, of course, Natalie Elphicke, with the comments that she made about the government's failures on migration and also around housing, is just the second Conservative MP that we've seen in 2 weeks who've called out those failures. Of course, Dan Poulter as well on healthcare. And just like so many former Conservative supporters in the country, I don't believe that we should say, as the Labour Party, that if people have changed their mind about the Conservative Party, that they're not allowed to then support Labour. Instead, we should be saying that Labour is a party that wants to govern for the whole country, that we have a plan to deal with these critical issues that impact on everyone. The Conservatives don't.
So you're absolutely clear. This is a genuine ideological conversion. There's lots of rumours always when these things happen, including about Mr Poulter as well, of grubby deals being done. Can you confirm for people listening that she has not been offered a peerage as a result of this and will not get a Labour peerage?
I absolutely can. And I would say anyone who reads her statement will see there a genuine commitment to trying to make sure that she's listening to her constituents, delivering on the issues that really matter to them. She's become persuaded that the Conservative Party simply cannot do that, and that it's only Labour that can deliver on those really important issues. And I think she's right to have taken that decision.
I'm going to try one more time on Diane Abbott, because she has been put through a very, very, very long and traumatic process, frankly. Can you give her any indication at all, if she's listening tonight, as to when this process might be ended and whether she will eventually be led back into the Labour Party? Time is running out for her and for this Parliament.
Well, I'm well aware of that, but as Labour Party chair, I was absolutely determined to ensure that we had a process that was robust. Now, does that mean that sometimes it can take a long time? Yes, that's right. It can take a long time. We ultimately need to make sure we're dealing with these issues properly. I know that's something that Keir Starmer is very concerned about as well, and the Labour Party's whips too. We're not going to be rushing these matters, but nor are we going to be treating people unfairly.
Well, you say unfair because, you know, there is an argument that justice endlessly delayed eventually becomes justice denied.
Absolutely, if that was the case, but that is not the case.